Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my non-spoiler review for Avatar The Last Airbender Katara and the Pirate sSilver. This is the first ever Avatar one-shot comic, a solo story focusing on pretty much one character being told in basically the equivalent of a individual part of one of the comics. But it's just one story all in one. And so we're starting off with Katara and the Pirate sSilver, and then in February we're going to be getting Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, and probably a third one-shot that hasn't been announced yet after that. So a lot of the focus of this one, I'm doing a non-spoiler discussion first, and then tomorrow we'll do a spoiler discussion where we talk more heavily about the details of the plot and stuff like that. So I want to take this video sort of to just kind of give my thoughts on sort of this format, how it is, just a lot of the stuff surrounding this book, because like here's the thing with this. The book itself, because I'm going to be talking a lot about just the stuff surrounding this book. The book itself is fine. I would consider it to be very middle of the road, a solid story. It's fun, it's entertaining. I think Avatar fans should pick it up and buy it and read it, but mainly from the point of view as being this is the only new Avatar comic released this year. Seems crazy to say that, but that is in fact the case. There's been one new Korra comic and one new Avatar comic released this year, and that's been Dark Horse's entire new comic output for 2020. This is where the issues start to come in. But like I said, I still would ultimately recommend it. But it is primarily because if you're an Avatar fan, why wouldn't you get the new comic? The new comic is not terrible or bad, so you should pick it up. The issue is that middle of the road is not what we need at all right now for Avatar comics, given what's happened sort of the last, year and a bit. So a lot of the problems surrounding this come down to, scheduling stuff, which is that this year, this is it. This is the only Avatar comic released this year. The last Avatar comic released prior to this was Imbalance Part 3 back in September of last year. It's the same creative team on this book as is on the Katara comic, but they've just shifted the format of books that we're doing. Then you have to keep into account the last new content from Dark Horse full stop was Runes of the Empire Part 3, and that was in February. So this is the first piece of new content in 8 months, or for Avatar specifically, 13 months. And it's not worth the wait in that sense. It has been released at not a great time, and it feels like it's been put out to sort of, die almost. That, like, look, this is fine. I think a lot of people are ultimately going to read this book and enjoy it, and then probably not think about it for the next couple of months until the next one-shot comes out. Pretty much exactly the way Team Avatar Tales went. Another book that just really wasn't important. It came out, people read it, and were basically like, yeah, it's fine, and no one really thinks about it again. It feels like that for this as well, and it shouldn't. We should be excited for each and every Avatar comic coming out, but I know from just the videos I did in the preview kind of build up to this that a lot of people straight away could see from the description and premise for this book that this was not going to be it. This was not a particularly strong way to start off one-shot comics. And now that I've read the thing in full, I have to say I 100% agree with that and predicted it. There isn't really much of a takeaway from this book, and that's the main issue that I have. Why did they put such effort into telling this story when there's not really that much here? It just feels like a waste of a very good creative team when you did have them on a comic that was kind of getting towards important content. At the very least, it was building the connections, it was advancing the story forward. But then out of nowhere, you just decide, let's stop doing three-parters. Let's stop doing these comic trilogies that we've been doing for the last 8 years, since the thing that really have helped the Avatar comics from Dark Horse to take off. Let's stop doing that format, and instead we'll just do random one-shot comics where it could be anything that they cover in these things. Based on the first two announced, they've decided to set one during Avatar, and then the second one is going to be set in the comic timeline, but I think it's just after or just before the Rift, I believe is what they said. So at least that one's a little closer to what we want, but it's not really where we really want the content to be set, which is post-Imbalance. And I think most people at this point are like, do a time skip after Imbalance. That's more where we want. We don't want to be this close to ATLA. We want to move on a little bit and get closer to Korra, so more important stuff can happen. And I think that's what most people do feel about the comics, is just that when they tell important stories, they can and are usually very, very good. Ruins of the Empire Part 3 showed that it's not that they've forgotten how to do important stories. They can do something important like that Kuvira story. But this Katara book, as the way to start off one-shot comics, a brand new format, was not the correct decision. And that's the thing of like, this isn't just a case of bad timing. That adds onto it that, you know, after this much time, this is the comic we get. That's not great. But also, even for it being a one-shot comic and it not being a part of, you know, advancing everything going forward, it still doesn't feel like the best use of a comic to set it during this exact time and really have no takeaway by the end. That when I got to the end of this book, I just, you know, closed my tablet over and was just kind of like, okay, was there anything particularly of note that came out of this? And ultimately the answer was not really. I enjoyed reading it, I don't regret buying it, but after all that waiting and, you know, kind of hyping up as the release was building up, it really wasn't worth the kind of time and effort almost. And a lot of it comes down to where they chose to set it. Like, it's during ATLA, in between 209 and 210, so in between Bitterwork and the library. Basically the only place they could place this book, because Toph is a part of this book, so this gap between these two episodes is kind of the only time you have within book 2 to actually tell an extra story with the characters. So they chose the right place during book 2 to do it, but in doing that, they basically locked themselves out of being able to do anything of note. Because if you had to say in one sentence what is ultimately the takeaway from this book, it is that basically Katara proves to Toph that she can be tough. That is basically it. That is the net result of what happens in this book. That basically already happened in the show, as the two characters interacted with each other back and forth and had their episodes of the show as they kind of clashed with each other. Yes, I can appreciate to a degree that this is still relatively early on, and so addressing the situation like post the chase relatively shortly after that, I think, is kind of needed. But the problem here is also that the premise for this book is a little forced, and it doesn't feel particularly great how they go about getting to Katara feels the need to prove to herself and the rest of the group, especially Toph, that she is tough. And I talked about this a lot in the previews, and basically what happens is that Toph starts basically bragging about the fact that, you know, she thought Aang to earthbend in a day, and that it took Katara a couple of weeks to teach Aang waterbending, and that difference in time of him learning bending comes down to the fact that Toph is like really direct, she's tough, and so she sort of forces Aang to learn it really quickly, whereas Katara is too sort of, you know, kind and caring, and so things take a little bit longer because of that. And it's like, okay, I guess that's the setup, but it also feels like a borderline continuity error, because Wait. What are you trying to say with like Aang learned earthbending in a week versus like Katara took weeks to teach it to Aang? Like, what technical term are we using here for Aang has learned an element? I would not say at the end of Bitter Work that Aang just quote unquote knows earthbending any differently than when Katara taught Aang the moves that she did know back in Book 1, Waterbending Scroll 108. In my mind, Katara, in that case, if we're using the logic of Bitter Work for Toph thought Aang earthbending in a day, then Katara thought Aang waterbending in seconds, not weeks. Plus, you have to keep the context in mind of Toph was a master teaching Aang versus Katara starting to teach Aang when she was barely even, able to use any waterbending moves herself, just going through all the self-thought stuff. That's where it feels forced in the sense of like, it feels like the writer is purposefully not doing a story set during the comic timeline to avoid any potential kind of continuity errors, and so it's a little bit easier to write, yet immediately comes across these kind of awkward situations where you're trying to fit a story into a time period where there really wasn't a story planned, and you get those weird sort of lines where that doesn't really fit. And again, I don't think it's a full-on continuity error, but it's a little too close to the line to where I'm still like, why would you do that? Like, just come up with another way to get here. Just change it just a little bit. Similarly, on the Aang side of the story, they encounter a Fire Nation soldier, sort of separated from the rest of the group, and they sort of just, interrogate him a little bit, discuss like, okay, what are your thoughts on the air nomads? And we find out a little bit more about, how the Fire Nation, the sort of propaganda they have about the air nomads, so that they don't look like out-and-out villains for having killed them all. And, Aang tries to sort of set things straight with this Fire Nation soldier, but in the end, nothing really comes of it. It's just this proof to Aang that he's not going to be able to change the minds of someone who's already, set in stone with the way that they think. And again, it's one of these things where, like, it comes awfully close to the line from 302, The Headband, which is where, like, Aang basically discovers in the school that, wait, you teach people that the air nomads have a formal military and you, like, lie about it? And to me, it felt like Aang was sort of surprised to hear that, and his answer to the teacher was like he was hearing this for the first time, and he's like, that's a trick question. And obviously he effectively nearly reveals that, like, he was present during this time and so on. So it does feel weird to see him in this book basically say, like, oh, and they've been saying all these other rumors that are basically the stuff he only learns about in 302. Again, I think they just about sort of keep it in check, but for a comic trying to stay out of continuity errors and, like, complicated writing, they get into some surprisingly awkward situations where it feels a little bit like, okay, you sort of had to forcibly write that in a way to, like, include anything of note, and in the end nothing really happened. The other thing about it is, like, just, it's a fun journey for Katara, but it's nothing we didn't already know. We know Katara is tough. She's one of the best waterbenders in the entire series. We've seen her fight. If this is set in between 209 and 210, we've seen her fight lots and lots of times. Waterbending Master has already happened. We've seen her fighting during the Book 1 finale, during the early episodes of Book 2, and so on. Is there a need to write a story about her just, needing to be tough? Not really. And how they do it is, of course, okay, so she encounters these pirates when she's separated from the group and needs to be tough to keep her wits about her, as she kind of navigates her way back to the group while helping these pirates. And, that's fine. And yeah, the book presents Katara as being exceptionally skilled. There's a lot of moments, especially, like, towards the, like, 3/4 point in the book, where Katara is just amazing at waterbending and just, so powerful. And that's great to see, but we already know that. You don't need to convince me that Katara is one of the best waterbenders in the show, because you've already done that already. You don't need to say that. And I don't think Toph, even at this point, would criticize Katara for being like weak or anything like that. So what are you actually doing here? Like, why is this a story that needed to be told? In my mind, why would you use the massive production time and effort that goes into making one of these comics, and tell this story, this quality, this level of story? Why not do something more adventurous or ambitious and make it impactful and worth, all that time that went into it? That's the big issue. It feels like resources poorly used from Dark Horse when it comes to the amount of books they seem to be able to put out this year. The pirates themselves, led by Jiang, are fine. They're not. I personally didn't find them to be that interesting. I thought they, basically what they do with the pirates is that they have you believe that they're one way, but then sort of like twist and turn a little bit with like, actually Katara read them a little bit wrong. They're a little bit more noble than you think. But that's really all there is. Like, they don't really make that much of an effort to try and like tie in the stuff from the Kyoshi novels with the Dao Fei into it, though I suppose technically you can consider them Dao Fei because it all fits, even though they don't directly say so. The whole pirate silver obviously isn't really what you think it is, and I think that makes the book a whole lot less interesting with what they did with it. I didn't think the sort of minor twist with what that was about was worth it. I would have much rather this story went then the sort of expected and projected way, and we actually like dealt with, pirates wanting silver, like we went to some island, we had a little bit of a treasure hunt, compared to what actually happens in this book. The problem was that like once the action sort of set piece towards the end happens, it basically is just like Katara will solve this because she is extremely powerful, and she does. So there's no real threat in the book, and it's basically just, can Katara help the pirates get to this area? They do. Great. She basically finds her way back to the group, and because the pirates are still there, they convince everyone that they convinced the group that Katara was actually involved in this crazy sequence of events, and that she is tough because she ran with pirates for a little bit. Great. But there's no real takeaway. Like, and that's the thing of like, do I think we'll ever see Jiang again in an upcoming comic? No. Do I think we'll miss out by that happening? Not really. Was there really any particular growth for Katara in this book that she wouldn't have got elsewhere? Not really. Like, yes, there's a little tie-in that we get here from this episode relating to pirates to the previous episode dealing with Pirates 108. That's nice, but it's very small when it happens. They don't overly lean into it or anything like that. I don't feel like they give us a particularly deep exploration on any other side of how to view the pirates or anything like that. The same ultimately goes for the Aang side of the plot with the Firebender soldier, in that yes, it comes close to almost, revealing something before it happens in 302, but they still don't really touch on anything new. The main takeaway there is literally just that, well, okay, Aang, I guess, knew about some of the way the Fire Nation were talking about the air nomads a little bit earlier than we thought he did, but there's no real takeaway beyond that. I always appreciate Aang talking about his culture, and I appreciated why he wanted to defend them here, and that, it was nice to see him sort of stop and realize okay, I know we have to go after Katara, but we all know Katara can take care of herself. We need to talk to this guy. I did like that, but again, there was no takeaway. But if there was a takeaway, then it would have gone into sort of continuity error territory. And so it's stuff like that that immediately shows you the limitations of this book, of that plot couldn't do more than it actually did right here. And what we got right here was fine, but nothing more than that. And the same goes for kind of like the everything really else in the book. Like Katara gets to prove that she's tough, but we already knew that. So it's just her sort of proving more directly to Toph, who is relatively new to the group, that she does that, which is fine. But she already does that over the course of the other episodes. Beyond that, like, there's a nice scene where Sokka takes his turn to talk to the Fire Nation soldier, and he like really confronts him with some good logic. And I think that scene is very well written, and it feels like perfect Sokka. And it presents the point about the indoctrination basically of the Fire Nation soldiers, especially that they believe what they want to believe, and even with all the logic in the world, there's no real way to sort of prove otherwise to them. And that's nice enough, but those minor touching on topics to me aren't good enough in a book like this. I still come out of this feeling like, was this the best story for Katara you had? Like, why couldn't you have taken a lot of the elements of this, but set it during the right time period? Set it like after Imbalance, or like just before Imbalance, or whatever, because there's a little bit of a time skip between North and South and Imbalance. Set it like during there or something like that, and have Katara be separated from the group in another way. Explore pirates post-war, because they sort of bring that up towards the end, like, oh, you're pirates, but what are you going to do after the war ends? And it's like, oh, I don't know what we're going to do. Again, there's no real takeaway from that. But instead, the book, I feel like, should have been set during the post-war time period. That way you're more free. Yes, you don't have this sort of Fire Nation always there to sort of force some of these action sequences, but you're also freer to travel around the world and move around a bit. And I think it would have been more interesting to see a end of series Katara interacting with pirates, not really knowing when she's going to interact back up with the group, but she's confident enough by the end of the series that it's not really a problem. And then you maybe could have had the side plot be about something different. Like I said, I actually almost wish that this had taken a more stereotypical pirate approach of like really going into like treasure on an island or something like that, rather than what we got here, which was just like the Fire Nation are blockading this like port town in the Earth Kingdom, and the pirates are taking some stuff from the Earth Kingdom and bringing it to another place, and that's really all that there is to say here. Again, it's like very lightly touching on topics of like Earth Kingdom pirates stealing from the Earth Kingdom army, even though the Fire Nation is occupying Earth Kingdom territory. Stuff like that is happening that speaks to, I suppose, deeper topics, but again, it doesn't go into them. The whole idea for a book like this, to me, in 2020 for Avatar, is that you use books like this to explore topics like that, not to minorly touch on them and ignore them as if they're going to be presented better somewhere else, because the somewhere else is these books. And that's where I think this book just ended up like really, really frustrating me. And this is where the timing of this really affects it. Of just this book being released now was not what we needed. And right now, when the communication from Dark Horse about the future of Avatar comics has been very bad, to the point where we just have no idea what the plan is, we don't know when we're ever going to get a continuation after Imbalance. We just don't have a clue. We don't even know what's next for Korra comics. Look at the schedule of releases for Korra books. There's the Book 1 art book reprint, and that's it. There's no new content for Avatar on the horizon. And the only new piece of content on the horizon, now that Katara and the Pirate Silver is out, is Toph Beifong's Metalbending Academy, which is another one-shot book. Now, straight away, that one does look to be a lot better, because it's set during the comic time period, and while it's not post-Imbalance, it still looks to be, okay, we can actually hit something that hasn't been explored, because extra content adding onto the comics from a different format of comics is actually something kind of new. And it looks like they're going to use a lot of the more minor characters that are fun, that people like in that book, with like Chong and the Nomads, Earth Rumble, Toph set students are going to be part of that book. That's all good. We didn't really have any of that here. It was very much just Katara on her own, proving to us something we already knew, and then it was Aang with a Fire Nation soldier, again, pretty much just touching on ideas we already knew about, but just in a minorly different way. Now, getting back to some positives here, Peter Wortman's art, I think, has continued to improve drastically. I think the art is incredible in this book, and especially towards the end, and we get some of the Katara, action-centric pieces. They're really good. I think some of it is so nice looking. Like, there's a full page shot of Katara doing some water bending on some Fire Nation people, and there's a lot of just moments like that throughout the book that just she gets to prove how skilled she is. Do very, big bending, ice and stuff like that, and just an incredible showcase of how skilled she is, and just the art of both the technical side of things on doing the boats, how he does the water, because a decent amount of it is sort of at sea, and then even the characters themselves is really, really fun to go through and watch. I think the problem with this book, like I've been saying, is that this book was sort of destined to only ever be average from the second they came up with the premise for this book. Because I can't even overly criticize the writing, because the writing is good for the level of book that this is. But the problem is that I still don't think we've seen the full potential of Faith Erin Hicks on an Avatar book, because I don't think we've seen her do a book that is ambitious enough that we're actually able to see her writing the characters, going through character development. It's clear from this that she knows how to write all of the characters in character, and she knows the right references to make to kind of interlink things in, and that's all fun. But I want to see if she can write the important stuff, and it is kind of a little bit frustrating to see her mention a few times in interviews that I'm almost afraid to write Azula, or it's easier to write stuff when it's set during the show compared to during the comic timeline because continuity stuff. And it's can we, then maybe get a writer who is fine with writing in the more continuity heavy time period and so on? Because I think Faith Erin Hicks can do it. It's just at whatever stage in the planning of these books, with imbalance as well, as well as this, they just wrote stories where they're only lightly touching on important topics and not really moving things along as much as they, should be moved along. And we're already, in a situation where there is a lot of frustrations with things of how many comics do we have to go back to get to, I suppose, the last time something truly important happened in the comics? And I think you do have to basically go back to 2016, Smoke and Shadow Part 3. We're still waiting for the continuation to this. Azula. What is happening with Azula? Why not do an Azula one-shot? But I think it's relatively clear from the scope of this book and what the premise of the next book seems to be, the Toph book, they don't seem to want to do that stuff, and I don't know why. And until we begin to get more comics that are showcasing the willingness to do those topics, I don't really know where we're going. And this also being during the year where Avatar has been at its most popular for a long time, with the return to Netflix for both shows, the increase in popularity, how well all of the Dark Horse books are actually selling this year, with new fans coming in. Why are the comics sort of at their weakest, at the lowest they've been in quite a while, as the franchise is at the strongest that it's been in quite a while? We need to get back on track. They need to make some announcements. And this is the sort of the first release in the last 8 months it's not good enough right now. And that's, I think, most of what I want to talk about in the video today. It's just, you know, I want to be excited going into an Avatar comic again, like I have been for most of the last 8 years with all of these comics. And I haven't got that from this. I didn't get it from Team Avatar Tales. The last time I got it was, you know, Ruins of the Empire Part 3. So there's proof that relatively recently they have done and got right important content. But something in the Avatar side of things, they've just really lost track of what they're doing. Because I think reading this and just reading like a short story told over the course of like 70 plus pages, there's room to write a lot of important stories in a book at this length, even just in one part. And that's what I mean, is just like stuff like, say, Aang finding the other sky bison. Connective tissue that we're waiting to see in the Avatar time period to connect with stuff from the Korra time period. You could do that in books like this. Like, I don't think we need necessarily a 3-parter to tell the story of like Aang finding the other sky bison. Why can't that happen in like a one-shot? Similarly, like, why can't Katara be doing something a little bit more important that links more heavily into, I suppose, you know, connecting between the series? They're the sort of ideas that we want. Zuko and the Dragon Egg. Where does he get Druk from? I think a story like that, if you're not going to have time maybe in the middle of these more important 3-part books, do them as these one-shots. The one-shots don't have to just be these kind of fun, random stories. Like, you can tell important stuff because they have told important stuff before. Like even some of the Free Comic Book Day books here, like I suppose, you know, Shells features some decent Kyoshi backstory in terms of like the origin of the Kyoshi warriors. Rebound was a full like prequel story for Smoke and Shadow. A lot of the stuff from the Lost Adventures, like say, what is it called? It's called The Bridge, I think it is. Let me just see this again. So the ones that are set kind of like in between book 2 and 3, so Going Home Again and The Bridge, are important stories during ATLA. So it's just another case of like, I think they got the timeline a little bit wrong. They chose the wrong time to set a story, and there was options. And this book, like pretty much like the first book that Dark Horse released after having the license, is proof that they can do short stories and they can do them well. Obviously, this is an example of, for the most part, them not getting it right more recently, highlighting kind of what's happened in the last, while at Dark Horse. Like, why are most of the comics from earlier on in the run, the likes of The Promise, The Search, The Rift, Smoke and Shadow, why are they sort of, stronger than like Imbalance, North and South, and so on? I'm not sure. So yeah, that's my non-spoiler, my initial thoughts on Katara and the Pirate Silver. It's a kind of long video, but it's what I want to talk about right now about this book. I can't talk too specifically about the details right now because I'm still kind of in that mode of just still being like, wow, I can't believe how long we waited for this book to come out and just how little that there is here. And I just wanted to talk generally about it and then hopefully, calm things down over the rest of today, going into tomorrow, and then tomorrow we'll do the kind of more in-depth breakdown of the specific parts of the book. Because like I said, I still would ultimately recommend people buy Katara and the Pirate Silver, but like I said, mainly because why wouldn't you buy the only Avatar comic released this year when it's solid? Really nice art, and it is fun, it's just not particularly important. So they're my thoughts on the book. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.